Hello everyone, thank you for joining. You are here for the new security policies with macOS, what PPPC means for you. My name is Michael Paul. I'm a program manager at Jamf in the product management department, coming to you live from snowy Minnesota. So to get into what we are going to go over today, here is our agenda. First, we're going to start with a little introduction to Jamf, what we do, who we are. Then we're going to get into the new user data protections from Apple, what this means to you and your end users, how to identify the impacted applications, how to leverage the privacy preference policy control framework, troubleshooting, and then ended up with a little Q&A. We are going to get a little technical here today. Don't worry if you can't follow along with everything. This is being recorded and will be shared to all of you watching later. I have a bunch of links at the end of the resources that help me build this presentation, and I'll condense it in one nice, easy, short URL as well. If you have any questions during the session, feel free to throw them in the Q&A section versus the actual discussion area on WebEx, and we will get back to you at the end of this. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, Jamf, who are we? What do we do? Well, we have one simple goal: helping organizations succeed with Apple. Pretty straightforward, but very broad in its application. How do we do that? Well, we do it with our portfolio. We have Jamf Now, which is simple MDM, no IT required. We have Jamf Pro, Apple Management for the IT pros, which we're going to be digging into more in this session here. And then we also have Jamf Connect for Mac authentication and account management. So Jamf Now, the idea is easy device setup, simple management, and security without complexity. Jamf Pro, we can get in and do a lot more. Everything from zero-touch deployments to device configuration to app management, extensive inventory, security controls. In particular, we're going to be digging into that one here today. And then finally, self-service app catalog, essentially enabling your end users to choose their own adventure of what they do. Again, kind of ties into what we're going to be talking about today, and we'll see self-service in action. So currently, we have more than 20,000 organizations using our software, managing over 12 million devices worldwide. As you can see by the number, we're quite fortunate with our customers out there that help us push us to make our software better. But getting into where we're actually going here today, when we talk about all these new security policies, better to talk in the global terms of the things that kind of brought this to light. Now, if you're not familiar, GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation, was something pushed forward in Europe in particular, around the European Union, about enabling end users to have more control over their data protection. Now, that's not what started Apple down this path with these settings, but it definitely helped bring all this stuff to light even more to the general public. There is this overarching concept called TCC, or Transparency, Consent, and Control. That is a term that's, again, same idea about enabling and being transparent to your end users, allowing them to have consent and control over what has access to their data. Now, the term TCC wasn't made by Apple, but Apple has definitely adopted it in their systems, in the framework they use, and all these different things. Apple first started introducing TCC-related things back in iOS 10, when you saw things like apps asking for access to microphone and contacts. And then more recently, Apple gave us control to manage these settings on macOS via their privacy preference policy control. Since that is a mouthful, and we work in the tech industry, we make acronyms for everything, so we've been just calling it PPPC. But call it whatever you want, the end goal is the same. It's all about giving end users the ability to decide what they want to share in regards to their own data. So, what does that mean to our end users? Well, it means users have a choice on what has access. They are literally going to be prompted to what they want to grant access to. It also means users might disable or block needed applications that you need for your organization. This will also mean they will be prompted a lot. As you can see by these little prompts on the screen here, all of these are essentially saying this application would like to have access to this other application or this service on your system. Now, we see a lot of okay and don't allow. So this is allowing your end users to do that. This is all about end user enablement. So what does it mean to the admins? Well, it probably means you're going to have to do a lot of education to your end users, explaining to them that these are not bad things. These are good things. These are things that are giving them more control over their data. It also means that there's going to be a lot of testing prior for admins. Unfortunately, there is no easy button just to accomplish everything in your environment. You're going to have to dig into all the different things you are using in your organization. Admins are going to have to learn how to read the logs related to TCC. Understanding parent processes, not to be caught off guard by what might be red herrings. Understanding the required identifiers needed to be able to whitelist these services, and then understanding the target or receiving services. So what are these applications trying to access? All of these things are required to understanding and deploying and managing these settings. But when it really comes down to it is you as an admin, even though these are big changes coming in macOS Mojave, the idea is don't panic. Even if they are prompted and they say deny to having the software access something, you as an admin can override their previous decisions by pushing out a configuration profile from your MDM server. So nothing is broken, nothing is stopped. We can help you get to a good spot. So a little rundown on PPPC in particular. As I mentioned, macOS introduced it in 10.14 Mojave, specifically for user-approved MDM. And this is, again, all around user enablement. So your required computers have to be user-approved MDM. And we'll get more into that in a little bit. At the same time, at the release of macOS Mojave 10.14, Jamf had a zero-day release of Jamf Pro 10.7.1 that added support for the PPPC profile upload. Also in 10.7.1, Jamf added an automatic deployment of a PPPC profile that whitelists the Jamf framework to work with all of our needed things that we touch on the system. In Jamf Pro 10.9, we added a GUI for you to actually make your PPPC profiles with inside the Jamf Pro interface. So I was talking about we added this automatic deployment of the PPPC profile in 10.7.1 to kind of show you what we do with it and how that works. We're going to hop over to our JSS here and scroll down in settings, and we're going to go down to security underneath the computer management framework. Here you see a checkbox automatically selected for you that says automatically install the privacy preferences policy control, and it's for user approved MDM computers. Well, if you're not user approved and you launch self-service, you will see a warning like this. Thankfully, we're going to just direct you over to system preferences to approve that profile. I click approve. And now the magic of MDM and our automatic deployment of the profile here will be automatically pushed out to our computers. Beyond that, now that we have this profile out there, we're going to actually use the existence of that profile for all of our scoping going forward. But first, I'm going to run over to our nifty little knowledge base article here, where we run through all of these things as implications and everything else related around the PPPC. As you can see, this is a long article. I tend to be verbose, and I helped write this. Getting down to our section on pre-approval for the Jamf management framework, we see a few different things here. In particular, user approved, has to be macOS 10.14, and you need push notification enabled. Okay, cool. So we need all those requirements, and that when we automatically push our profile, we're already making sure that you meet those requirements. So we are actually going to create a smart group here that's going to use the existence of that Jamf profile being on a computer as our scope for all future deployments. So that way, any of your future deployment, you don't have to worry about the logic. Is it 10.14? Is it user approved? The fact that it has the Jamf profile, and if you don't know the name of it, you can use the ellipsis there. Have it use the pre-populated ones. Since it has the Jamf profile, we know it meets the requirements, so we'll just use this going forward. Cool. So now I have a smart group created. I'm going to use that for all of our future deployment as we go through this webinar. But what am I deploying? How am I gathering those information? What do I actually need to do? Well, let's take a look at the values you need. I mentioned before you needed a few different things to get this done. The first and one of the most important is the identifier. What are we actually whitelisting? For applications, we're going to get the bundle ID. If it's an executable, whether that's a binary or a signed script, we need the path. We also need the code signature. So a code signature is created when an app or a binary is signed by a developer certificate. If something is not signed by a developer certificate, it will not be allowed to be whitelisted via the TCC framework. Your only recourse would be to either sign the thing yourself or go back to the developer who made that and get it signed. Unfortunately, that is a requirement for this to work. So I get the identifier and the code signature of the thing that I am trying to launch, the application I'm trying to use. But I also need to determine what service or application is trying to access. So if you remember those pop-ups, I had this app is trying to access this service. So, okay, well, we'll start first with how do I get those first two things? How do I get the identifier and the code signature? Well, we have a few methods to get that. I can either run the code sign command manually in terminal on the computer and pointing at the applications, or I can use a nifty script out there called tccprofile.py. It's a Python script created by Carl Ashley. There's Profile Creator created by Eric Berglund. We also have a code signature gather.sh script available in our GitHub. And we have our PPPC utility created by Jamf. All of these are open source and available to anybody managing Macs, but the PPPC utility has the lovely benefit of being able to upload these profiles directly to the Jamf Pro server via our API. And all of these things are linked at the end, so if you're looking to try to track these things down, we'll provide you some links at the end of this webinar. So cool, that's how I gather the identifier and the code signature. Well, what about those target services? Apple gave us 11 services that we can whitelist to. Without going into all of them, calling out just kind of some of the different ones there, some interesting caveats: camera and microphone. We cannot do any allow for. We cannot do a whitelist to say this application has access to that. So the ramification of this would be if you are pushing out say a video conferencing software that needs access to camera and microphone. When your end users launch it for the first time, they will be prompted and asked if they want to allow it to have access to the camera or microphone. You have no way to pre-approve that and say, yes, it has access to the camera. This is always going to be an end user choice. But if the end user is using the video conferencing software, they probably want to have it enabled anyway. And even if they say deny, they still have the ability to go back later and change their choice inside System and Preferences, Security, and Privacy. A note about the System Policy All files. This is our most powerful one that we have access to and essentially encompasses a lot of other things. Say an application needs access to contacts and calendars and reminders. You could go the lazy route of just saying System Policy All files and give it access to everything. But the whole idea around this stuff is security, and you generally don't want to grant or over-grant permissions. So it's better to grant permissions to just the things it needs. And the last one, Apple Events, is unique from all the rest of them in the fact that it's not necessarily a target service, but it's the middleman that connects two processes or applications. So the prompts when you saw one application wanted to talk to another application, that's where we're going to start looking into Apple Events, and we'll dig into that more a little bit later. But to kind of look at, all right, now, I know the things I have to gather. How do we actually do that on a computer? Well, I'm going to hop over to my computer here. And let's say I want to gather the values for iTerm. I know it has some of these prompts out there. Well, what I can do is I can go to terminal, and I can run the code sign command, space, -dr, space, hyphen, and then the path to the application. Hit enter. Now it gives me a bunch of different information here. In particular, I get the bundle identifier. Cool. And then if I look, everything after the equal sign and the greater than symbol is the code signature. So if I select everything after that to the end of the parentheses there, copy it, I can take this value over to a Jamf Pro server and make a configuration profile to whitelist this communication. I'm going to set a category because I like organization. And then I'm going to scroll down to the Privacy Preference Policy Control payload and click Configure. Since I copied the code requirement, I'll paste that in here. I'm going to go back over and grab the bundle identifier as well. Since this was an application, we're using bundle identifier. If it was a binary executable, I'd choose path. Cool. Next, I need to say what app or service this application needs access to. Well, I don't know that yet. I actually wouldn't know that until I actually did a little more digging. One way to do that is actually launch the application and play around in it. Okay, not the automatic updates. Sometimes it means launching different things, initiating different services. Sometimes it even means quitting the application. Here now I see iTerm would like access to control your computer using accessibility. Okay, cool. So I now know, and I click deny, I now know that this needs access to accessibility. So I'll go down, choose accessibility, hit save, and then click save again. And I now have a profile that I could push out to my computers that would be using this software. We also made you an easy button, and that is the PPPC Utility. So here I have this application. Let me go back. I'm going to find that application iTerm that I wanted to whitelist, drag it in. You'll see it automatically pulls out the bundle identifier, and it automatically pulls out the code signature. I can double click, select it, go to my Jamf Pro server and paste it in there. Or I could go the even easier route of specifying what it needs access to here, choosing accessibility. Now I could save it locally and upload it to any MDM server, or I can go to upload and upload this directly to my Jamf Pro server. I'll give it a payload name that is required. And I have the optional choice of setting a payload description. I like descriptions. I'll check the connection to make sure it gets there. Cool, and then click upload. Wonderful. Go back to my Jamf Pro server. And let's go take a look at this profile that was just uploaded. All right, I see it actually built in. And all the things specified there. Now, awesome, it's already set here. But something I do need to do is define the scope. I'm going to use that group, a smart group I created before. Click Save. And now, if I take a look at my logs, with the magic of Apple push notification, that actually went out already. I go check my profiles, and there it is. Cool. Nice, easy, there we go. Cool, I see a couple questions coming in. I'll get to them at the end, just to make sure we have the time to get through everything. So, all right, well, we found out some ways. I knew that app had a prompt, so that's why I went looking for it. But how else do I identify apps that might be impacted in my environment? Well, I could go the reactive route of letting my end users tell me when they have prompts, if they tell me. That's banking on them actually talking to me. I can manually launch all the applications in my environment. It's tedious, but it can get you there. I can go watch the logs on different systems out there for things related to com.apple.tcc, and we'll show you how to do that later. I could read a TCC DB, which is the TCC database on the computers, to see what choices end users had already made for yes or no, allow or deny. Or I can look at entitlements, which is a newer thing Apple added in 10.14, and we'll dig into that more in just a little bit. So from an admin perspective, what do we need to test? Well, we have a few different things. We'll take a look at looking at normal policies. We'll look into parent processes to understand where that might impact you or trip you up. We'll look at self-service policies and how those work. And then we're going to dig into Apple events, as that is a little bit different than the rest. So, why did my screen go black? Try that again. Oh, sorry about that. Normal policy. They work because they are triggered by a launch name in the background. So that honestly and unfortunately, there is no prompts to the end user if a normal policy triggers a TCC prompt. The only way you might know this is the policy might have some errors in the logs, or you can use the log command on the macOS system and search for com.apple.tcc for any of those prompts or things that were happening in the background. So not the best route to figure out what things are going on. Even past that, if you're doing testing locally on a computer and you're calling things via terminal, this is where you might run into parent processes. Just because it's a Jamf policy does not mean the OS will see it at Jamf as the parent process. If I run something in terminal, it would say terminal wants access to contacts, when in all reality what's in the background is needed is Jamf wants access to the contacts. Now, even more than that, you're an admin there in terminal, so you see the prompt. But if you were actually SSHing into a computer or remotely connecting in, the prompt would actually show on the end user screen as opposed to yours. So you have no ability as an admin, if you were SSH'd in, to click OK or don't allow, and this might actually scare your end users. So please use caution when you're SSHing into a machine for the prompts that might actually come up. To look into Apple events a little bit more, as I mentioned before, it works as the middleman, allowing communication between two processes. Here we see two examples of Microsoft Outlook wanting to have access to Skype and WebEx plugin wanting to have access to Outlook. To allow this communication, if we were to whitelist this prior, we'd have to use the Apple events. So that's a common thing. We see two applications needing access to each other. Another super common thing that we see with Apple events is if you are using scripts that are maybe leveraging OSA scripts to prompt end users to input things, say authenticating for something or entering a value you want to collect. This may trigger these TCC prompts. So if we go over to my Jamf Pro server, I'll show you an example of a common script workflow that a lot of people have been using for years because it requires no additional things to be installed. It's using built-in things in the system. So if I take a look at this asset tag script, it is an OSA script inside a shell script, and we have a tell application system events. That actually is going to bring up a window for the end users. So if I go run a policy with that script right now and not have anything whitelisted, I should see a prompt. Let my policy run. And there we go. Jamf agent, which is the binary behind self-service, wants access to control system events. I'm going to click Don't Allow. All right, so that was blocked this time. But what can I do to actually correct this? Well, if I go back to this verbose KB, and I look through all this different information, there's a ton here. If I keep going and keep going, and I go past all this fun stuff down to almost the very end, I'm just about there, pre-approval of Apple events. So we actually pre-built a profile that will whitelist you to system events, system UI server, and Finder. Linked on this GitHub here, if I go over to that GitHub, you will see a few things here. Code signature gatherer script and Jamf Apple events along with some links. I'm going to click clone or download. Let's take a look at what I got downloaded here. Cool. There's my profile. There's my script. Awesome. I'm going to go back to my Jamf Pro server. Go over to configuration profiles and choose to upload. I hit choose. Find that profile. Awesome. Click upload. And now it's here. Everything pre-built, populated. Now, again, I like organization, so I'm going to set a category. Scroll down a little bit further, and let's take a look at what's pre-populated. Here we see the Jamf app, its identifier, and its code signature. And it's whitelisted to communicate with system events, system UI server, and Finder. And then we also see the Jamf agent, which is what's behind self-service, whitelisted for the three same applications, and the Jamf binary whitelisted for those same three applications. So however you're running these policies, we're going to cover that. Now I'm going to add that same smart group as my criteria again. I'll click Save. Cool. Let's see how quick APNS works. I'll click on Logs. And it's already out. Cool. I can verify it by going to my local computer and checking out Profiles. And there it is. Jamf processes Apple event. And I see the whitelist for all those different communications. Now, if I go back to self-service and run that same policy again, we should see the prompt for the asset tag. And then the policy will complete. Cool. So what are some things we can do to troubleshoot and dig in a little bit more and kind of help enable you further? Well, we have application entitlements. We're going to dig into watching the log, both post-install or reading it periodically with the command. Look at reading the TCC database, and which the TCC database includes all the choices that the end user made. And then we're going to look at how you can read the MDM overrides plist, which includes all the things pushed down via MDM. Now, those last two do require terminal to have access to full disk access in system preferences. So I keep mentioning this entitlements. What is entitlements? Well, if an application was either sandboxed or created using the new Xcode for macOS 10.14 and have this new hardened runtime. And basically what it means is if an application needs to have access and talk to one of these different services, the app actually has to predefine it in its entitlements. So it actually lists out what things it needs access to. So this code sign command is a little bit different than the one we were doing to get the code signature, but it's still very similar. So what's it look like? if I actually run it on an actual application. So looking at Microsoft Outlook, I see, okay, well, it needs access to camera. I see it needs access to address book, and it needs access to location. Cool. So I have those things I know what it needs access to. I also see some potential Apple events where other things it might need to talk to. And Apple even, or Microsoft even goes super old school and lists out older applications like Link and other things that might actually need to talk to. So they're being very verbose on the things it needs. Thankfully, there's also some apps out there to help us read those entitlements. Eclecticlight.co has a nifty app called TACCY that if you open an application in there, it will automatically check the boxes and kind of maybe a little bit easier visually represent the things it needs access to. So here you see Dropbox, what it needs access to. And again, same thing over on the Outlook one. We see it needs access to contacts, camera, and location. So those are different things that we can actually, we can know right ahead. Those are the services that this is going to need access to. Well, let's say I want to take a look at logs and dig in a little bit further. Maybe the software was written in an older version of Xcode, and it doesn't have these entitlements, and it's not displaying what it really needs access to. Well, we can use the log command that's built in, and we can do a stream, which will be a live feed of what things are happening. I run that, and then I go run my applications, and I'll get a bunch of good information. Now, if you want to be a little bit more specific and not as verbose, we can use the attribution chain addition there to filter it out a little bit more. Again, this is a live command, watching things live. If I want to go back and read previous logs, I can do a show instead of a stream and look for the things as well. Now, be mindful, those using the show and looking at the previous stuff, those do get wiped out on reboot. But so let's say I want to use the more specific command. What does my output look like? It's this very clean, super easy to read log, giving me all this helpful information. But in all reality, it is actually super helpful. To call out what are the things you're actually looking for, I kind of formatted that output to look a little bit closer. The values that we're looking for here have some identifiers. Things to start with RESP are the things responsible, the application that is responsible for the request. So here I see it's Jamf agent. Cool, so this was a self-service policy. ACC, the things that are trying to access that the target there. So that would be an OSA script. And what is it requesting access to? Well, an Apple events. And we look a little bit further, it's also trying to access system events. So, okay, cool. Carl actually has a great blog post on reading the TCC logs linked at the end as well if you want to dig into this a little bit more. Well, let's say I want to take a look at what my users have previously selected. I can use a script created by Carl Ashley as well to read out the database and its contents. And I can use the TCC util binary built into the OS to reset previous settings. So if I'm doing some testing on a machine and I don't want to reinstall the OS to get it back to a fresh state, but I want to just kind of reset previous user choices, I can use that binary to do that. There is a nifty script made by Matthew Warren, also known as Haircut, to reset the TCC privacy settings as well. So what's the database output look like? Well, if I look at the system library or the standard library there, this shows an output from my computer of which applications I have granted access to. If I look at the users library, I see even more things. And there's a few things in here, Liverpool, Ubiquity, that are built-in OS things that we have no control over. But some of those other ones are things that I have personally said, yes, you have access to these things. The TCC database is also visually represented in security and privacy and system and preferences. Again, none of your settings that you push out via MDM are visible here. This is just for the things that the end users clicked allow or deny in those different prompts for them. If I want to view the settings that I pushed out with MDM, I can actually use this command here to do that. Now, to see how that actually works, if I go over to my computer and I run this, so I have plist buddy. I'm going to print out the value from this plist. All right, I hit enter, authenticate. Gives me an error. As I mentioned before, this terminal needs full disk access. So if I go to security and privacy, yep, I'm there. Yep, and then I authenticate. And I go to utilities, which is underneath applications, and I select terminal. All right, needs to quit. So I'll relaunch terminal. Maybe make this a little bit easier to read the output. Not sure if it's going to help that much. Let's run that command again. Authenticate. Cool. So here is my output from that. So this shows all the different profiles and settings I have pushed down to the computer. Now this is the only place other than the profiles pane and system preferences that represents the settings that are down and being respected on the computer. So it overrides all previous user settings. So even if the user said deny and I have a profile down that overrides it or that sets it to allow, our allow wins if it's pushed via MDM. So we have these different methods, we have these ways to gather, we have these ways to report it, but all of them are a little bit tricky. So we're always trying to look at ways to make this easier. Well, thankfully for you, coming soon, Jamf PPPC Utility 2.0. It's going to allow the import of existing profiles for editing, and it's going to automatically select the services based on the entitlements. So that way you don't have to go digging. Now that's only going to work for the entitlement section if it was built in the newer version of Xcode or as a sandboxed app. Otherwise, you're still going to have to go manually launch those applications to figure those things out. What helped me get all this information here was a bunch of different great resources out there in the community. I have all these links. Don't worry about screenshotting and trying to grab all these things here. They actually are all condensed on a file here. So if you go to the jamf.it/TCC, you will find a links document that has those links to all those different resources. I also can't stress highly enough the value gained from hanging out in the TCC chat room in the Mac admin Slack community. There's a wealth of knowledge and some incredibly helpful people there, and you might interact with me there as well occasionally. So to recap what we went over, new user data protections from Apple, what this means to you and your end users, how to identify the impacted applications, how to leverage the privacy preference policy control framework, and troubleshooting. Now, I said a lot of words. So here we're going to try to go through and answer some questions. Let me go back and look through quickly. All right, cool. Is there any way to approve MDM profile via script? Unfortunately, no. This has to be user-approved. This is an Apple choice for security and enabling end users. This has to be an end user choice. Now, thankfully, if you use device enrollment program or our standard user-initiated enrollment, they are already user-approved. The only way they would be not user-approved is if you did some other methods, maybe using our quick add or other stuff. Okay. So any way for dealing with unsigned or potentially older applications can be made to function. Yes, again, you would either need to sign it yourself or I would push back to those developers to get them to sign it with their own. This is just something that Apple requires. It has to be signed. So a question about approving accessibility permissions require a user to be an administrator. To change those settings in system preferences, the end users do have to be administrators to unlock that. So unfortunately, that is what it is. The question about PPC utility created by Jamf, why not make the PPPC payload in Jamf Pro the same as the interface in the Jamf PPPC utility app? It was actually developed by different developers, and kind of the functionality there with it. We are going to keep working on that PPPC utility to make it easier, make that easier for all the people using it. They are a little bit different though, but it will have some other awesome things coming out. Question, somebody asked, to use the PPPC utility, do I need to be on Jamf 10.9 or even 10.7.1? You can use the PPPC utility back on the older versions. It will just sign it. If it sees that it's not the newer version, we will sign the profile, which means it will upload and you won't be able to view that profile in the Jamf Pro GUI, but it will be there and it will work. Now, not until 10.9 could you actually see the contents of the profile. Yep, and so he asked, is there a way to whitelist between Skype and Outlook? Yep, you'd use the Apple events. You need the identifiers, both the bundle identifier and the code signature for both, but you can do that. Question about updates, auto app updates. Unfortunately, those are not applicable to the PPPC stuff. The settings, are they per user or per machine? That's a great question. End user selections, those things could be potentially user level, but all the things pushed by MDM are a computer level. Somebody was asking about the submit asset tag policy. I believe I snagged that off of the Jamf Pro GitHub. If you just search for asset tag Jamf submission, there's a bunch of good examples out there. Oh, question. What does validate static code requirement setting do? There's very few apps out there, but it's ones that kind of wrote weird, that don't follow standards, that once they are running, they actually like respawn themselves and they invalidate their code signature. Basically, you use that checkbox if you have an application that is not respecting your PPP settings, even though the code signature matches, the bundle identifier matches, but sometimes it's not doing it. You can select that checkbox to essentially have it run off the value that's listed on the disk as opposed to what's being presented in memory, because the apps sometimes invalidate themselves. Most apps have been updated so that it doesn't need to be there, but we added it just be in case. Question on when the PPPC Utility 2.0 is going to be ready? When it's done. I'm not going to promise any dates, but they are working on it right now. And keep running through. Question, do you bundle a bunch together or do you separate it out? That is really up to your choice. There is no limit on how many you can have. You can build as many as you want. That's why also the PPPC Utility, one of the updates, is going to have the ability to upload and edit existing ones. So that way you'd be able to do some of the modifications and stuff locally there on that utility to combine them. But it is really up to your choice of how you want to do it. I personally like having things separate, so that way I can be more precise with my scoping and deployment. Question if Jamf integrates with Splunk for progress reports. We do. If you go to marketplace.jamf.com, we have some Splunk integrations and some other awesome stuff out there to help you enhance your security reporting in your environment. Another question about uploading multiple pre-populated mobile configs, so you don't have to create mobile config anytime and add a new one. Again, that would be a future edition of the PPPC utility to go back and edit existing ones. It does have to be a question about expired certificates. It does have to be a current and valid certificate to sign it for it to work. Any plans by Apple to streamline PPC or KEX whitelisting workflow? I don't know. That is a great question for Apple. Not sure, but there is definitely a lot of manual work behind both of those for the admin. Yes, this is going to be recorded, or it was recorded, and it will be available for everyone who has attended. And how do you find the code signature of an app if you don't have Jamf? Well, you can use that code sign command in terminal. You can use any of those, the TCC profile.py, or even if you're not a Jamf customer, you can use the Jamf's PPPC utility. The only thing you don't get out of that if you are not a Jamf customer, you can't automatically upload to the API of another MDM server, but you do have the ability to save and export it. Oh, and another question about my smart group I made right away that I was using for my scope of everything. I kind of ran through that quickly at the beginning. It is a smart group that is looking based off of profile name and the name of that profile. So if I go into my smart group, choose profile name, hit that 3-dot ellipsis, that will show me all of my previously installed profiles on any of my computers. And then I want to look for the privacy preference policy control. Just select that option in there, and then I have a smart group based on that. I ran through. I think I got all the questions. If not, feel free to reach out to me. My name is Mike.Paul. You can reach me at Michael.Paul, Mike.Paul, any variation of Mike.Paul at Jamf or jamfsoftware.com. Is it possible to deploy an application that asserts access to entitlement for camera and deny that access? You could deny beforehand, and then it is denied. The end user could go into system preferences, security and privacy, and say allowed later and add it. But that is that. Unfortunately, camera and microphone, we don't have a ton of control around. Any problem scoping machines that are not PPPC compatible, non-1014? Well, this only works on 10.14 computers. If you push out one of these PPPC profiles to a 10.13 computer, it will get installed. No settings will work. If I then upgrade to 10.14, that profile still will not be respected until I uninstall that profile and reinstall it. So again, that's why I use that smart group of has the Jamf PPC profile. We have some logic built into the background that we are only going to deploy that profile to 10.14 to computers that are user-approved MDM. So if you make that your scope for all of your future ones, you can limit that out to say, all right, you don't even have to build the logic of looking for 10.14 or user-approved. We're actually already doing that in the background for you. And the difference between whitelisting kernel extensions and PPPC, some applications, depending, you see it with antivirus and different security software and virtual software, other things, they have something called KEXT or kernel extensions. That's another thing that you have to whitelist. To whitelist that, you need to get the team ID of those applications, and then you populate them in a different profile in Jamf Pro. They're similar, but they are different in their settings and deployment. Somebody's asking me, do they need to be an admin on the computer to approve app access to microphone and camera? If they are prompted with those prompts, you do not have to be an admin. They can click yes or no. It's the adjust things in system preferences that start requiring the admin access. So it's after things have been already denied. If you want, you could use that TCC reset script out there by Haircut. You can make that available in self-service. So if you want to allow end users to reset previous decisions if they are not admins, you can enable it from self-service, because then we run things as root, and then they can launch the application again and they'll be prompted once more. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into how to approve KEXT in this. There is some knowledge base articles out there. There is Richard Purvis, also known as Franton. If you search for KEXT Apocalypse, he has a couple great blogs on the gathering of that information. He's got some scripts you can run via policy in Jamf and collect all those different values you need of installed applications. You can grab those team IDs and populate them in your Jamf Pro server. Question about full disk. Would that be considered all files? Yes. Full disk is the equivalent to system policy all files. It doesn't help that they use different terms, but the service in ART and all the PPP stuff is system policy all files. In system preferences is called full disk access. Question: if you have a Unix binary and doesn't have a bundle ID, if it's a binary, you use path instead of bundle ID, but it still has to be signed. Again, I mentioned his name a ton of times. Carl Ashley has a write-up also on signing scripts and executables as well. Or you go talk to the developer and get them to sign it. And then just use the path to the binary. Cool. Well, that's the end of our time. Thank you all for joining us here today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, you can find me and a bunch more knowledgeable people on the Mac Admin Slack TCC channel. Thank you very much.